Hello, everyone. Welcome to another delightful episode of Background Interview, the show that accompanies you during your morning commute, your daily chores, or whenever you crave a hearty dose of entertainment blended with enlightening discussions. I'm Lily, your resident host, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here once again. Today, we'll dive into a world of gothic imagination, timeless lore, and extraordinary literary genius. So grab a seat, settle in, and let us keep you company while you get inspired and educated. Before we get into the heart of our interview, let me share a little anecdote from my own life. Something that might amuse you all. I recently decided that my daily routine needed a dash of the unusual, so I signed up for an online course in medieval manuscript illumination. Yes, you heard that right. The instructor told me to be patient and calm. I tried my best to mimic a medieval monk at work, but as soon as the cat jumped onto my desk and spilled my paints, my entire saintly mindset flew right out the window. Let's just say my cat's paw prints have now become part of my evolving art style. Maybe centuries from now, historians will talk about the Lily feline imprint technique. Anyway, enough about my chaotic attempts at medieval artistry. We've got a very exciting guest with us today. A man whose novel practically defined modern vampire lore and continues to influence popular culture long after his own lifetime. Ladies and gentlemen, and all you lovely listeners out there, please give a warm round of applause for the one, the only, Bram Stoker.
Thank you so much, Lily, and greetings to everyone. It's marvelous to be here, truly. I must say, I never envisioned myself stepping into the modern era for a conversation, but I'm delighted to see so many eager faces and to imagine all the listeners joining us.
Please, come and sit, Bram, let's get comfortable. We have quite the journey ahead of us, exploring your life, your inspirations, and, of course, your magnum opus, Dracula. But first, for anyone who might be less familiar with you, would you kindly introduce yourself in your own words?
Certainly. My name is Bram Stoker, born in 1847 in Dublin, Ireland. I spent much of my early life overcoming health challenges, which meant I spent considerable time indoors, listening to stories and absorbing the atmosphere of my mother's harrowing tales about epidemics and folklore. Those experiences undoubtedly shaped my imagination. Later in life, I worked as a civil servant, then as manager to the famous actor Henry Irving at the Lyceum Theatre in London. Amid the hustle of theatre life, I penned numerous works of fiction, though I'm most remembered for Dracula, published in 1897. It's quite a wonder to see how far that story has traveled through time.
We're honored to have you. Now, I'm curious about your upbringing. You mentioned your childhood illnesses that confined you to bed. Could you elaborate on that? How did being unwell and somewhat isolated shape your worldview and writing later on?
Growing up, I was bedridden until the age of 7. In those long hours, books and oral storytelling became my windows to the wider world. My mother was a gifted storyteller, and she recounted vivid experiences from her youth, particularly memories of a cholera epidemic in County Sligo, which she survived. Hearing these tales was a double-edged sword, simultaneously frightening and fascinating. Although I spent most of my days immobilized, my imagination roamed free. That sense of grappling with both fear and wonder became a cornerstone for how I eventually approached my fiction.
Did you have any formal education or mentors who encouraged your literary talents?
I did, indeed. I attended Trinity College in Dublin, where I studied mathematics, among other subjects. It might seem rather different from the life of a novelist, but I credit that rigorous academic environment with instilling discipline and logical structure in my writing. Additionally, I wrote theatre reviews for local papers, which is how I gained entry into the theatrical world that would later fuel my storytelling. My mentors at Trinity encouraged me to read widely: philosophy, the classics, contemporary literature, leading me to develop a layered approach to the supernatural. The seeds of Dracula, in many ways, were already planted by then.
That's quite a background. Before we delve into the thrilling details of your most famous work, let's talk about some personal turning points. Were there any failures or moments of self-doubt that shaped your path toward writing?
Absolutely. One significant challenge was balancing the demands of my position with Henry Irving at the Lyceum Theatre and my desire to write. Many times, I questioned whether I had the stamina or skill to complete a novel, especially a sprawling, atmospheric piece like Dracula. The theatre world could be all-consuming, and I often worked late into the night on manuscripts. There were certainly rejections and lukewarm receptions to some of my earlier writings. Yet each setback reinforced my determination. I told myself that I had a story worth telling, and if the seeds of it haunted my dreams, then perhaps it would haunt readers' imaginations too.
What an inspiring perspective. Now, let's get right to it. The heart of today's discussion, Dracula. This novel changed the landscape of horror and remains timeless in its appeal. Could you share the genesis story of how Dracula came about?
My fascination with vampire lore can be traced to various sources: Gaelic folklore, stories about Central European superstitions, and travelogues describing the Carpathian Mountains. During my research, I stumbled upon references to Vlad Tepes, also known as Vlad the Impaler, a historically brutal ruler who inspired some elements of Count Dracula. However, the novel itself is an amalgamation of many influences, including the epistolary style of Wilkie Collins's The Woman in White. The diary entries, letters, and newspaper clippings in Dracula gave it an immediacy and realism that I found compelling. I wanted readers to feel as though they were uncovering a dreadful secret alongside the characters, bit by bit, each entry guiding them deeper into darkness.
And were you conscious at the time that you were creating something that might one day define the vampire genre? Or was it simply a story that you needed to tell?
If I'm honest, I did have a feeling that I was venturing into a fresh, intriguing territory. Yet I never imagined it would become such a cultural and literary mainstay. I was striving to write a story that was both terrifying and reflective of the societal tensions of the Victorian era, the clash between modern science and archaic superstition, the anxiety surrounding contamination or invasion, and the interplay between rational minds and the unexplained. The vampire, Count Dracula, became the ultimate vessel for these deeper fears. Still, I couldn't have foreseen how thoroughly he would capture the popular imagination.
Let's talk in more depth about the plot and characters of Dracula. Some of our listeners may only be vaguely familiar with the story, so do give us a comprehensive summary. What happens, who are the key players, and what are the critical plot points that make your novel such a classic?
The novel kicks off with Jonathan Harker, an English solicitor traveling to Count Dracula's castle in Transylvania to handle some property transactions. Initially, Jonathan is a polite guest, but he gradually discovers he's more of a prisoner. Strange events unfold, he notices there are no mirrors, and the Count has some bizarre habits. Soon, Jonathan realizes Dracula is far from an ordinary nobleman. Meanwhile, in England, we meet Mina, Jonathan's fiancée, and her dear friend Lucy Westenra, a charming young woman courted by three admirers: Dr. John Seward, Arthur Holmwood, and Quincy Morris. Lucy becomes mysteriously ill, displaying signs of restlessness and drained vitality at night. This leads Dr. Seward to consult his mentor, Professor Abraham Van Helsing, a learned man who begins to suspect something supernatural is at play. When Lucy eventually succumbs and transforms into a vampire, Van Helsing and her former suitors must confront the horrifying truth. After they provide Lucy with what they consider a merciful release from her undead state, they discover Count Dracula has turned his sights on Mina. She, too, develops an unholy connection to the Count. He drinks her blood, and she can telepathically sense his presence. This bond becomes both a curse and a clue, as the group leverages Mina's link to Dracula to trace his whereabouts. The climactic chase leads everyone back to Transylvania, culminating in a final confrontation. Quincy Morris is mortally wounded in the process, but they manage to annihilate Dracula. The novel ends on a note of relief and reflection, with a sense that, though the Count is defeated, the shadows he cast upon him may never fully vanish. In short, it's an adventure steeped in dread, loyalty, and the victory of courage over ancient darkness.
Beautifully detailed. One aspect that stands out to modern readers is your use of letters and journal entries, giving the novel a unique sense of immersion. Why did you choose that structure over a straightforward narrative?
I believed it would heighten the suspense to let readers piece together the puzzle from disparate sources. By presenting each character's first-hand account, I allowed for multiple perspectives. The letter and diary format also mirrored the detective work the characters undertake, making it feel more authentic. You, as the reader, effectively become part of the investigative team, deducing who or what Dracula is and how to defeat him. In my view, that engagement compels a deeper emotional investment in the story.
Now, tell me about the societal reaction back then. How did your Victorian contemporaries view Dracula? Did it spark immediate acclaim, or was the novel's true impact recognized only later?
Some readers found it absolutely thrilling, applauding its originality and tension. Others saw it as too lurid, too steeped in sensationalism. The Victorian era, though famed for its prudeness, also relished a good Gothic shock now and then. But I'd say the novel's monumental impact was gradually realized over the decades that followed. Stage adaptations helped cement its popularity, and once the story leapt onto the silver screen, particularly with Bela Lugosi's portrayal in 1931, the legend of Dracula soared to new heights. In essence, it simmered for a while, and then it erupted into global consciousness.
Bravo! This leads us to the broader question. Why do you think the vampire myth, especially your version, resonates so powerfully with people across all generations?
In part, it's because vampires embody a fascinating duality. They are simultaneously repulsive, undead creatures feeding on blood, and alluring, often depicted as aristocratic and seductive. That contradiction arouses both fear and attraction. Couple this with themes like immortality, forbidden desires, and the constant battle between reason and superstition, and you have a recipe for timeless intrigue. As society evolves, each generation reinterprets these themes, but the core tension remains compelling.
That's a great analysis. We will have plenty more to explore, including the deep symbolism within Dracula. But first, let's transition to our new Q&A segment, where we get to hear from our listeners and this vibrant live audience. It's time for background interviews, mailbox and mic session. We'll start with a few emails that came in from listeners around the world. Here's one from Elise in Lyon, France. Bram, how did your experience working in the theater influence the dramatic tension in your novel? That's a great question. Care to answer?
Wonderful question, Elise. Theater is all about mood, pacing, and keeping an audience on the edge of their seats. Working closely with Henry Irving, one of the greatest actors of his era, gave me a front row seat to how drama is meticulously built scene by scene. All of that found its way into Dracula. I approached the novel almost as if it were a stage production, orchestrating moments of shock and suspense. The precise timing you see in the book, the rise and fall of tension, owes much to my theatrical background.
Next, we have an email from Javier in Mexico City. Mr. Stoker, did you base any of your characters on real people you knew personally? If so, how did they feel about it, or did they ever find out?
That's a rather interesting inquiry, Javier. While none of the main characters are direct portraits of real individuals, traits of certain acquaintances certainly wove themselves into my characters. For instance, Lucy's charm was inspired by a woman I once met who seemed to light up every room she entered. Dr. Seward's inquisitive nature borrows from a doctor friend of mine in Dublin. However, I always maintained enough of a fictional layer so that no one could point and say, that is undeniably me. So to my knowledge, no one confronted me about it, but who's to say what they whispered among themselves?
Now, let's check in with our lively studio audience. Anyone out there with a question for Mr. Bram Stoker? Yes, you, in the middle row. Here, let me step down and give you the mic. All right, what's your name and your question? Hi, Gregory. Nice to meet you. Your question? Oh, okay, perfect. That's an intriguing question. Bram, this is from a gentleman named Gregory. He wonders, how did you research the folklore aspects of vampires for Dracula? And were you ever worried about sensationalizing or misrepresenting any particular culture?
Gregory, I approached the vampire myth with great curiosity. I read everything I could find, travel memoirs, folklore compendiums, historical accounts, especially those pertaining to Eastern Europe. I also spoke with people who had visited or come from Transylvania. I tried to remain respectful of the myths while adding my own creative interpretation. Sensationalism was a concern, yes, but at the same time, I was crafting a piece of Gothic fiction. In that realm, heightened drama is somewhat expected. Still, my aim was to preserve a certain authenticity. I think that's why many readers feel the novel has a realistic sheen, even as it delves into supernatural territory.
Great answer. Anyone else with a question? Yes, the lady near the aisle. I'm coming over to you. Let me just weave through these seats. Pardon me, folks. Yes, right here. All right, I see your hand raised. Please share your name and question. Hi, Sophia. What's your question? All right, got it. Interesting. So, Bram, this is from Sophia, who asks, if you could speak with your younger self, the Bram Stoker who was just starting to imagine the concept of Dracula, what advice would you give him, knowing what you do now?
That's an evocative question, Sophia. I'd say, trust in your instincts, and let the story simmer in your mind. Don't rush it. Back then, I felt the urge to get everything down in a frenzy, perhaps from a fear that the ideas would vanish. But with hindsight, I know the best stories mature over time. I would also advise my younger self not to be deterred by any initial indifference from publishers or critics. The world is wide, and sometimes success blossoms in ways and places you least expect.
Lovely. Let's have one more audience question for now. Anyone else? Ah, the gentleman with the cap in the far corner. Give me a moment to get to you. Yes, let me just. Whoa, sorry about that. Almost tripped on a mic cable. That would have been comedic, but probably painful. All right, you there, sir. Name and question? Hello, Lawrence. And your question is? Ah, okay, got it. Excellent question indeed. Bram, this is from Lawrence, who wonders. Dracula has undergone countless adaptations. Are there any interpretations, film, theater, or television, that you feel come closest to your original vision? And are there any you think missed the mark entirely?
Lawrence, that's a delicate matter because each adaptation has its own merits, shaped by the era in which it was produced. I must say that the 1920s stage adaptation by Hamilton Dean and later by John L. Balderston captured a certain theatrical mystique that felt close to my spirit. Bela Lugosi's performance, though, is iconic. He brought an aristocratic gravitas to Dracula which influenced so many subsequent portrayals. As for missing the mark, well, some adaptations stray far into creative liberties that overshadow the original themes. However, I find it fascinating that my novel can be reframed so diversely, some comedic, some horrifying, and some focusing on the romantic or psychological angles. At times, I hardly recognize my own count, but in a way, that's a testament to the story's elasticity.
Fantastic questions, everyone. Thank you so much. Now, as promised, let's shift back to our emailed inquiries from around the globe. This is proving to be quite a jam-packed discussion. We have one here from Nina in Toronto, who asks, what part of Dracula do you think is the most misunderstood by modern readers?
Nina, I think many modern readers may not fully appreciate the Victorian undercurrents of sexual repression and xenophobia. Dracula, in some ways, is an embodiment of an outside threat, representing both foreign invasion and unleashed desire. In my day, these were very potent fears. Today, while people may still pick up on the erotic subtext, they might not grasp just how scandalous certain scenes or implications were to a Victorian audience. So if I had to point to a misunderstanding, it's that the novel isn't merely about a vampire, it's about deeply ingrained cultural anxieties of the time.
Excellent perspective. Another listener, Jawei from Singapore, wants to know, were there particular authors who inspired you to explore the Gothic and supernatural genres?
Certainly, Jawei. I held a deep admiration for writers like Edgar Allan Poe, Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, and Mary Shelley. Each, in their own way, delved into the macabre or the morally ambiguous territory of human existence. Poe's psychological terror, Le Fanu's spectral broodings, and Shelley's Frankenstein all underline the idea that horror isn't just about monsters, it's about confronting the shadowy parts of our own psyche and society. Those influences permeated my approach to supernatural fiction.
I love that you mention Le Fanu. He's sometimes overshadowed but profoundly impactful in the Gothic scene. Alright, one last email before we open the floor for a few more live questions. Mark from Sydney asks, in your personal life, did people ever treat you differently because you wrote such dark, haunting material?
Mark, that's a delightful question. I recall that some acquaintances were genuinely startled to learn I was a rather ordinary fellow, not some grim man stalking the streets in a black cape. In fact, my day-to-day life in the theatre was social and collaborative. Of course, there were jokes made at my expense, people imagining I slept in coffins or poured garlic, but in general, my circle understood it was all fiction. If anything, writing Dracula made certain dinner conversations far more spirited.
Now, let's see if our audience here has any lingering queries. Raise your hands. I see a few. Yes, right over there, sir. Let me come down again. Careful, Lily, watch that cable. Alright, your name? Okay, right. Fantastic, let's hear your question. Good one. Bram, this is from Dominic, asking, how did your family and close friends react to reading your manuscript for the first time? Were they supportive, or did they worry about the dark themes?
Dominic, truth be told, my family was mostly supportive. My wife, Florence Balcombe, was perhaps my most significant confidant. She read drafts, offered feedback, and even kept me from flying off too far into the shadows. Some friends did raise an eyebrow, wondering how I concocted such grim ideas. But in general, there was encouragement and intrigue rather than alarm. I believe they understood that I was channeling the era's fears into a thrilling narrative, rather than living in a perpetual gloom myself.
And we have time for a couple more. Yes, that lady in the back row. I'll head over. Pardon me, folks. All right, name and question please? Hi, Ariana. Oh, okay, I see. Got it. Bram, she's called Ariana, and she's asking, what's the biggest difference between your own vision for Dracula and how the character is often portrayed in modern media, especially those romanticized versions of vampires?
Ariana, that's a very interesting topic. My Count Dracula was aristocratic, but he was never meant to be the shining, romantic anti-hero that some modern adaptations present. He's more a cunning predator, though undeniably magnetic. Contemporary stories often emphasize the tortured lover angle. While I can see the appeal in exploring the vampire's sense of melancholy or loneliness, my vision of Dracula was primarily that of a looming danger, a manipulator whose aristocratic manner masked a monstrous thirst. So it's quite a shift to see him reimagined as a brooding heartthrob, yet it testifies to how versatile and reworkable the vampire mythos can be.
Yes, the idea of a brooding, tortured love interest might have baffled Victorian readers. Last question from the audience. Yes, you on the left. Let me mosey on over. Alright, we can take your question now. Hi, okay, nice. Got it. Bram, this is from Esther, who wonders, did you ever consider writing a direct sequel to Dracula, or were you satisfied that the story ended conclusively?
Esther, that's something I pondered occasionally. There was a sense of finality in how Dracula meets his end and how the characters move on. I felt I had exhausted the central mystery in the novel, and any sequel might risk diluting the core tension. However, I did write short stories that sometimes touched upon similar motifs of the supernatural. In truth, I was content with the completeness of Dracula. As an author, there's a certain peace in knowing a narrative arc has run its course without overstaying its welcome. I want to express my deepest gratitude to everyone who asked such thoughtful questions. The engagement is extraordinary. Thank you for indulging my reflections on a novel that's older than most people imagine, and still, it lives on in your questions and imaginations.
Our audience is simply fantastic, and so are our listeners at home. Now, before we wrap up, I have a few personal questions that I'm dying to ask. Ready for a quick lightning round, Bram?
Absolutely, Lily. Fire away.
Great. First, do you have any daily routines or habits that anchor you, even when you were deep in your busiest writing days?
I always strove to keep a structured schedule. Mornings were for correspondence and business affairs, particularly in the theatre world, while evenings were dedicated to writing. In addition, I found that taking long walks before dusk sparked my creativity. Something about that transitional light fueled my sense of wonder and, frankly, my sense of dread when I needed it. I firmly believe in a balance between discipline and letting your mind wander freely, so small rituals like a cup of strong tea at a certain hour or a short break to gaze out the window helped me stay focused.
That's lovely. Next question. You've had a glimpse of modern times. What astonishes you the most about our current era, especially in how we consume literature or media?
The speed and accessibility of information is absolutely astounding. In my day, researching something as niche as the historical figure Vlad Tepes required extensive library visits and rummaging through obscure volumes. Now, it seems you can call it up on a handheld device in seconds. And the variety of media, radio, film, television, streaming, podcasts, there are so many avenues for storytelling. It's both exciting and overwhelming. I love that more people have the tools to share their own narratives, though I wonder how one filters out what is credible amidst the flood of content. It's a fascinating puzzle of the modern era.
Final personal question. Looking back on your life and your landmark contributions to literature, how do you feel about the cultural legacy of Dracula and the entire vampire genre as it stands today?
I'm humbled, truly. It's more than I ever anticipated. Vampires predate me by centuries in the collective mythos, but Dracula evidently crystallized something that spoke to universal fears and desires. To see how many books, films, shows, and even comedic spin-offs it has inspired is extraordinary. While some depictions diverge wildly from my original tone, I see it all as part of a rich tapestry. The story continues to live, as Dracula himself might have relished, in countless new forms. I'm grateful people still find value, and that academics and fans alike keep analyzing, adapting, and keeping the count alive in modern consciousness.
What a remarkable conversation this has been. We've journeyed through your childhood, your challenges, your novel's creation, and the enduring impact of Dracula. Your insights have truly enriched our understanding of this iconic work, Bram. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was an immense pleasure to be here, and I extend my gratitude to everyone present and listening. It's heartwarming to see that, in this modern day, the spirit of storytelling is alive and well.
As Mr. Bram Stoker takes his leave, let's give him one more rousing round of applause for sharing his life, mind, and timeless creativity with us. And thank you all for tuning in today, both the lovely folks in our live audience and those listening from kitchens, cars, or offices around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the Background Interview channel, leave a comment about what thrilled or surprised you, and of course, give us a like to show some love. If you happen to be chasing your cat across the living room or got a work call and missed a chunk of this conversation, fear not. We're a podcast you can replay anytime, anywhere. Our entire archive is perfect for binge listening, especially if you need a refresher on the mesmerizing world of Bram Stoker. Remember, dear listeners, that Background Interview is here to brighten your day with a blend of humor, depth, and discovery. I personally like to revisit past episodes when I'm cooking up a storm in the kitchen. I end up learning about historical figures while stirring the pot. It's multitasking at its finest, trust me. On that note, we've reached the end of our show for today. I'm Lily, signing off until next time. Keep exploring, stay curious, and join us again for another enlightening and entertaining interview soon. Goodbye, everyone.